Right, let's start off with inspiration. What inspired Ian Fleming to write Casino Royale? Oh, this... I haven't even drunk any of this yet. That's how excited I am. Okay, this is, as I say, when you're any kind of artist, I say, you hear the sound of trumpets. There's something up there that is transmitting to you, and you're like a radio and you pick it up, and like a rat has to gnaw on pieces of wood to stop its teeth going up through its skull. As a writer, or a creative person, you have to have a creative outlet, otherwise you will go insane. For some of us, that train has already sailed. But I think Ian Fleming always had a knack for storytelling and stuff like that, and so it's really interesting to break down what it was that inspired Casino Royale and where it all came from before we go anywhere else. He heard the sound of trumpets. He needed to tell this story. Where did it come from? Well, let's talk about Ian Fleming. And this is another reason why I think the Bond books in particular have always resonated with me, because I think there are some things about Ian Fleming as a person and as a character that resonated uncomfortably with me. As I said, sort of we came from like the same social backgrounds. I don't really know. In England, like the class system is back when I was growing up. It was very, very weird. Lots of people had their chips on their shoulder, and you were, it was looking up at people or looking down at people and stuff like that. It's one of the reasons. It is literally one of the reasons why I moved to America, to get away from that. And also being bullied for having ginger hair. But let's talk about bullying, because Ian Fleming, Ian Lancaster Fleming, born in 1908. I'm reading my notes here. His father was called Valentine Fleming. Can you think of a cooler name than Valentine Fleming? It's funny how James Bond, Ian Fleming always went on about how James Bond was like the most boring pedestrian name he could think of. And I guess that if your father's called Valentine Fleming, then yeah, I can see why you might have wanted to go with that. Anyway, his father died during World War I, so Ian was raised by his mother, who, from all accounts, was kind of overbearing and bossy. And I think he nicknamed her M, actually, which is kind of weird. And it's very weird. I barely remember my grandmother, but every time I hear stories about my grandmother, it kind of sounds similar to that. So that's another reason why it always resonated with me. Ian Fleming went to Eton, which is a very posh school, and then he went to Sandhurst, which is a military school, where you're meant to emerge with commission in the British Army. When Ian was young, he got bullied a lot, and he hated his first school. That wasn't Eton, that was one before, Dunford, I think it was called. But it's interesting, I got bullied at school as well, a lot, so that's something that's always resonated with me about his books. He wasn't very good at school, either. He wasn't very good at school, he wasn't very good at Eton. He got kicked out of Sandhurst before he earned his commission. They always solicitously include the fact that he had gonorrhea when he got kicked out. But he was never very good at school, and he got bullied a lot. And to me, not only does that resonate a lot with my experiences of school and stuff like that, but I think it's also why the way he expressed those things through his writing also resonate very highly with me. Okay, so his mother, who was very overbearing and dominant and wanted the best for him, tried to get him into the Foreign Office. Again, this is something like I followed the same path. I took, just like Ian Fleming, I took the Foreign Office exam and I failed. So I didn't make it into the Foreign Office. But interestingly enough, when you talk about Ian Fleming's inspirations, his mother wanted him to ace the Foreign Office exams. So in order to do that, she sent him to a boarding school in Kibitzul in Austria, where he was taught by a former spy and his wife, who is a novelist. I mean, imagine that. So Kibitzul, you can obviously see the Kibitzul featured in his books with where his parents died, and Oberhauser, who was the man who was like a father to him, who ended up getting murdered, and that was the whole basis behind, I think it was Octopussy. You can see a lot of that stuff later coming into his work, so I find that interesting. But, like me, he failed the exam for the Foreign Office, and then his mother, who is trying to sort out his wayward son, and it really resonates with me, the fact that he was kind of like really lost and didn't quite know where he was going. She got him a job at Reuters. and he became a reporter and a foreign correspondent, and that really seemed to suit him with the travelling around and stuff like that. And it's funny because that's, you know, that's how I became Eurotrash and a writer and stuff like that. So he ended up going to Moscow, covering the trial of some British engineers there, which is kind of like his first foray into like spycraft. He actually requested an interview with Joseph Stalin, and remarkably enough, Joseph Stalin sent him a signed note back apologising for not being able to acquiesce to that request, which I always thought is a pretty cool story. But he, as much as he loved being a reporter and a foreign correspondent and that kind of life, and you could see he had a flair and a passion for writing, and that really resonates with me. His mother wanted the best for him, so put him into banking instead. Got him a job in banking and investing, and he was terrible and miserable at both. And he diverted his misery in certain outlets such as alcohol and affairs with married women. The affairs with married women are very, very resonant with Bond, and that's actually where he began his affair with Anne Charteris, who later became his wife. But we haven't even got to the good parts yet. Then World War II breaks out, and what happens is Ian Fleming, being the very well-connected chap that he is, got recruited by Rear Admiral John Godfrey, or just Geoffrey Godfrey. I just wrote Godfrey here, and I know his name begins with J, I can't remember. Anyway, he was the Director of Naval Intelligence, and he recruited Ian Fleming as his personal assistant, secretary basically. But this is really interesting because Ian Fleming has certain talents that started to shine, and I think something else about Ian Fleming's life that really resonates with me. People tried to make him do certain things that they thought he would be good at and would be good for him, and he failed at them and he was miserable. And then he got the opportunity to do some things in which he could exercise his talents and his creativity, and he was happy and wildly successful. And that is a story that everybody needs to listen to for the rest of their life. Going back to the whole Bond community thing, David Tursky did a fantastic interview with David Arnold, who of course does the music to a lot of the Bond films. And David Arnold was talking about how every day he gets up and he does something he's not going to regret.
One day, it will be the last day I'm alive, and I don't want it to be a disappointment. So I kind of try and do something from the first thing in the morning, try and do stuff that I wouldn't regret if this was the last time I was on the planet, you know, even if it was something simple.
And David Zaritsky said, you get to an age where you realize happiness is the true equity in life.
So I always tell my kids, who are no longer kids, they're adults now, that happiness, not money, is the equity of life. That's the real payment when you're happy.
And those two things resonate with me. And you look at Ian Fleming, you look at how miserable he was trying to conform, and how happy he was when he got to express his creativity. And it just speaks so much to what it was like for me growing up and things like that. So, okay, let's go back to World War II to lighten up for a second there. So, Ian Fleming was the personal assistant to Rear Admiral Godfrey. Rear Admiral Godfrey, by all accounts, was a dick. He was a dick, and people hated him and didn't like him. But when Ian Fleming started working for him, suddenly things started to get a lot smoother. The reason for this was the fact that Ian Fleming was very, very charming and good at sort of networking and things like that, and he basically worked as Rear Admiral Godfrey's spokesperson, and he wrote memos for him, sent as him, and started to facilitate a lot of things happening. And this really was where Ian Fleming just found himself in his element, because even though he was, you know, personal assistant to the Rear Admiral, he had a lot of autonomy, and he had a lot of influence, and he had a lot of creativity that he could use. He started coming up with ideas and sending memos around with schemes for World War II. And one of the themes of Casino Royale is about James Bond sort of playing cowboys and Indians, and it's about then later how you should focus on sort of human relationships more than that. And it's interesting because this stage in Ian Fleming's life, he was definitely playing cowboys and Indians. There's certain one that I highlighted here. So it's called the Trout Memo, where it came up with this fantastic scheme to have a dead body and plant fake intelligence information on him, and then leave him for the Germans to find. So they think he was a spy, they think they got some great information or whatever. And Ian Fleming wrote the Trout Memo, and it was entitled A Suggestion, in parenthesis, not a very nice one. Does that not sound like the first chapter of an Ian Fleming book? Anyway, one of the other things that he did while he was serving in naval intelligence was he was in charge of Operation GoldenEye, which was about trying to establish connections within Spain and stuff to facilitate their resistance against the Germans. But Operation GoldenEye, you can tell that had a pivotal role in Ian Fleming's life, because in 1942, when he went to Jamaica to attend an Anglo-American intelligence summit, he bought a plot of land in St Mary's Parish, and he built a house that would be called GoldenEye, or the house might have already existed, I'm not sure. Anyway, funnily enough, we're talking about inspirations for books, right? On the way to that conference in Jamaica, Ian Fleming stopped off and played chemin de fer in Portugal, which I believe was neutral during World War II, and he played against what he always boasted were German agents, and he cleaned them out in chemin de fer, which is the game Baccarat, which is of course the pivotal game in the book Casino Royale. And you can tell, I talk about hearing the sound of trumpets or having these, you can tell that was already a story that he needed to tell, because people used to mock him for it, for making it up, and they were like, you were just playing against businessmen. But in his head it was like, I was playing against Nazis. So you could tell that was the seed of Casino Royale right there. Right, okay. The war ended. And what happens? Well, Ian Fleming gets demobbed. And after years of being able to really be himself and enjoy himself, he ends up doing what he did before the war, being kind of listless and stuff. And I think thanks to his connections, not necessarily thanks to his mother, he got given the role of foreign manager of Helmsley Newspapers, who owned the Sunday Times. And this seemed like just the kind of job for him. So he got to travel around, and he was foreign manager of all the different stations and stuff. He had 3 months off a year, which he would spend at GoldenEye, his house in Jamaica. I believe, yeah, by this point, his affair with Anne Charteris sort of coming to the point that I believe her husband died. No, she divorced her husband, and she and Ian Fleming got married, and I think he had a complete panic attack. He was like, what the hell am I going to do now? Because I don't think being married was... It was very interesting. It was... if you want to go into like the whole psychology of like his relationship with his mother, and then this, and like reluctantly getting married and things like that, oh my god, you could have a field day. And it also resonates very hard with sort of having... feeling like you're obligated to have a relationship with someone when they're not necessarily the right person for you. That resonates very hard with me. Anyway, I think Ian Fleming always joked that he wrote Casino Royale as kind of like an escape from that grim reality. So he was like, I should write a spy book. And he did. He wrote Casino Royale, which is a thriller. And I find it really interesting because you can see where all of the inspiration for Casino Royale came from that game with the German officers that he claimed to have, and from his time spent gallivanting around working with the spies and in the intelligence intelligence community. I think it's really nice to be able to piece those bits together. So that's where the inspiration came from, but there's one more important element which I think a lot of people overlook, including writers, and that is, what is the theme of the book? And this is something that I think gets overlooked a lot when people talk about books, more often than not by the author themselves. Often authors don't really realise that there's a theme to their book until they've actually written it, and I speak from experience with that. My last book was almost like a dissection of my marriage, and it was incredibly therapeutic. And I think every single book has a theme to it. And to my mind, the theme of Casino Royale is that friendship and relationships are more important than principles and duty. There's a line that Rene Mathis has in which he says, surround yourself with people, James. because people are so much easier to fight for than principles. And to my mind, that is the theme of the book. And I think it's very interesting that it coincides with a sort of crisis in Ian Fleming's life, because he was getting married at that point. His whole life was changing and his priorities were changing. And so he was giving up the life of the carefree foreign correspondent and spy and playing cowboys and Indians, which is a line he actually uses in Casino Royale. And instead he was surrounding himself with his wife and soon to be his family. And that was what was more important. And I don't know whether that's something that he believed or not. I personally think it was something he believed. I think the reason he wrote this book was almost as a form of therapy to process this, because I know when I write books, they are to process some serious emotions and themes in my book. So I think that's a really interesting point that I think is very important to think about, especially in the context of all the stuff that happens in the book, especially the ending.